It's easy for us to do shows like this and write pieces about it. What about the restaurant owner, the cab driver, the Uber guy who hasn't had a pickup in 3 weeks? What about them? We need the exit strategy announced now. Wall Street Journal piece, very good. Talks about 4 components to what that would look like. How to get America working again. Any sustainable strategy against the coronavirus has to balance public health and economics by Kaplan and Levy. Piece number 1. We need mass testing. I know it started out slow. I get it. The testing was not set up for this. I'm not apologizing for the president, the administration, or anyone. I'm not interested in doing that. I'm simply here to tell you our testing infrastructure for a pandemic was set up for satellite testing and surveillance testing. It was not set up for mass testing. They fixed it. They're working on it now. I don't blame whoever you want. I don't care. Phase number 1 of this expands testing. No return to work strategy is feasible without mass testing of the affected and the asymptomatic. The asymptomatic could be low-level spreaders, could be high-level spreaders. We don't know. The data's been all over on this. Singapore and South Korea deployed extensive testing, contact tracing, community surveillance, and isolation and quarantine of contacts and contained their outbreaks without massive economic damage. The March 29 data shows that incident rates in Singapore and South Korea were less than 12% of Italy's, and the death rates 1/50th as large. Germany and Israel, which likewise acted quickly and decisively, also have far lower death rates than Italy and Spain. Ladies and gentlemen, we get this mass testing, which has been dramatically ramped up by the Trump administration. When we find out who the asymptomatic carriers are, people not showing symptoms who don't know they're sick, who test positive. It can't be done by testing 330 million people. It can be done by testing random sampling in communities and getting an idea of how prevalent this is. Then we can ramp up to mass testing that by April 30th, we'll know who coming into the office has it, who doesn't. Those people will have to stay home, contact trace them, tell those other people to stay home too. And you will get what happened in South Korea, where they had 1/12 of the numbers Italy did, and they didn't have the massive sustained economic damage we're having right now. We can fix this. Don't be the Will Smith character in I Am Legend at the end, where he's all skeptical. Watch that. I bet that movie and Contagion, I think, are 2 of the most viewed movies on Netflix or whatever right now. That movie Outbreak, which I don't like that movie. The Mutaba. I wasn't a big fan of the movie. Dustin Hoffman just was a bad fit for that role. Let's go to exit strategy number 2. First, mass testing. Number 2, the government should conduct serological testing. In other words, screening the blood for antibodies to see how many in a random sample of Americans have already recovered from COVID-19. This information will give scientists a more accurate estimate of the mortality rate, which, if on the low end of current estimates, may allow for some public health measures to be relaxed. Folks, I have been arguing this from day one. I can't say this in strong enough terms. There is no question this is a serious public health disaster. Period. Full stop. Nothing else needs to be added to that. The real question is not, is it serious? Disregard that. Asked and answered. The question is, on a gradient, how serious of a threat to human life is this? Ladies and gentlemen, that question matters. If it had the fatality rate of Hanta, Lassa fever, the Ebola virus, yes, this would require draconian measures to keep half the U.S. population alive. Mm-hmm. If we get serological testing and people find out they had the coronavirus and they'd already recovered and didn't know it, thought they had a cold, thought they had a flu, and didn't, we will get a better estimate of how fatal this disease is. And if the fatality rate is something resembling the flu or 5 or 6 times a factor of the flu, then we know the public response. We know how to grade it. We don't shut the country down for the flu, despite the fact it's fatal in many cases. It's not serious. It's how serious. The question is, isn't it serious? We already asked and answered that. Yes, it's how serious. Because if it is more serious and more fatal than we think, then maybe the public health measures we implemented would have to continue. If it's not as fatal as we think, then we have to take into account other factors here as well. Again, ladies and gentlemen, anybody who gives you the simplistic talking point right now while you're unemployed, losing your job, and at a red line of stress right now, anyone who gives you the simplistic talking point, it's not worth one human life. Ladies and gentlemen, we put a price on our own lives every day. We take risks in our lives because we have to survive. Police officers, like I was, go out every day to work, candidly, for menial, nonsensical salaries. They work for peanuts. Believe me, very few of the cops I know are getting rich out there. They risk their own lives every day because they have to survive and they do a job they appreciate and love. People travel on planes all the time and in cars despite the risk because they have to survive. We as a human race, as a country, have to survive this. We can't bankrupt the whole country if we don't have accurate data. We need that testing for antibodies. Stat. 3, we have to protect the most vulnerable. There's no question right now. We know who the most vulnerable are. People who are susceptible to hyperinflammation and cytokine storms and an immune response, and the elderly. We know that. The piece says, fortunately, screening for hyperinflammation is relatively straightforward and inexpensive. And targeted therapies for cytokine storm syndrome are already in clinical trials. Let me just translate that for you for a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes it's not necessarily the virus that's killing people. It's the immune response within the lungs causing pneumonia and causing basically a suffocation effect. Some people are more prone to an exaggerated immune response than others. That's what they're referring to with this hyperinflammation cytokine storm. We also know the elderly. If we can test and figure out if you're prone to that, we already know if you're elderly, you don't need a test for that. We know your age, you know your age. Then we can focus our assets, our isolation efforts, our social distancing efforts on those vulnerable crowds to protect them. We can then let the young go back to work. 4, ladies and gentlemen, we got to open businesses where close contact's not an issue. Quote, many of the 7.6 million jobs in construction can be performed by physically separated workers, allowing construction to restore millions of jobs and reactivate the sector's extensive supply chains of building materials and products, plus the services that support them. I see no reason, if you're on a job site where social distancing is the norm, not the exception. You're laying brick here, someone's pouring concrete there. If we can do it, then why not do it? Why are we shutting down these sites? I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. Folks, combine this with yesterday's show. We implement those 4 mechanisms right now. We implement some serious financial house ordering tomorrow. And I'm telling you, we can come out of this on the other side with decades of growth and prosperity once we get through the hard part, the down part, the bottom of that V. But we got to get serious.
You just heard The Dan Bongino Show. You can also get Dan's podcasts on iTunes or SoundCloud and follow Dan on Twitter 24/7 @DBongino.